So I have recently bought this knife here. It is a very good knife, highly recommended. Morakniv Eldris. It's a very short knife with a very thick blade, which has a rounded tip, and the roundness of the tip makes it hard to sharpen. So I invented an attachment which slides on top and then exposes the blade with 30 degrees on each side, so it's a 60. That's an excessive angle for most applications, but it's a very good way of demonstrating how the angle remains constant despite the curvature of the blade when you're sharpening it. So this makes it very easy to hold a constant angle of attack when you're grinding the edge, and without almost any effort it guarantees a good outcome. And as you can see, this knife is not very sharp yet. I've been using it for a while in the 3D printing to finalize my prints, shaving off excessive pieces of plastic. So you take this knife with the attachment and you can strop it back into action. And this 60 degrees angle is way excessive. It's kind of a cheat, you could say, to attack the very edge of the blade, the very burr, microscopic one. So you can only get away with it for so long until the knife becomes more like an axe rather than a knife. So here's the real attachment, which is much smaller. It's optimized, and this one I'm putting online, the drawing of it. This one allows you to sharpen it at 30 degrees while still catching the angles correctly. So here I've used a 180 grit sanding stone from China. Technically it's the cheapest sharpening stone you can find online probably, and I'm technically reshaping the entire edge of the knife at this point. Here, 180 grit. And I don't take great care at this stage. I just want the burr to fold into one direction, and then I check with my thumb to check if the burr has flipped across the entire edge. And with a rough stone it's pretty easy to notice. So once it flips, I flip the knife and grind the edge until the burr flips to the opposite side. And it's really hard to lose the angle here. It's quite amazing how much this simplifies things. You could technically be watching a TV or YouTube and sharpening your knife in the background with very little risk of damaging the blade, and you also will avoid all the scratches and everything. So it doesn't take long for 180 grit to shape the burr, but then you gotta smooth it out. Here's a 800, a broken sharpening stone, and I'm just using it to remove the burr. Again, being very rough. These are not high quality stones. They are not very porous. If you put water on it, the water actually tends to stay on top of the rock. It doesn't pass through, which shows poor manufacturing quality of the stone. But it gets the initial roughness pretty well. And here you can see I'm putting my finger on closer to the edge. That way the load goes right onto the sharpening edge and away from the support of the plastic. And this is, by the way, nylon. This attachment was printed from. Checking the burr again. The entire knife has the burr flipped, so I flip the knife and remove the burr from that side again. And as you go to stones of higher grit, the stones become finer and the burr becomes smaller. And at some point you will be struggling to actually feel which side the burr is on. or if there's any burr at all. So after flipping the burr a few times, you will just have to start going in kind of symmetrical mode, a few passes on each side, just to make sure that the burr is as small as possible. And at this point I go to my higher quality stone, Japanese 1000 grit, and this one I usually use with water. I don't want to show the manufacturer for some reason, but yeah, even without water it works pretty good. And if you add water on this stone, it just gets absorbed like a sponge. It just passes through it like it's a filter stone. So this is a rather high quality stone. It's 1000 grit, real 1000 grit, and I just use it for finalizing the edge before stropping it. And again, you can see that this stone is very small, and because the attachment is so reliable, the angle is constant. You can find more about it in my webpage at some point. Here, leveling the edge. And at this point the knife already cuts paper to some degree. It's not very fascinating yet though. And now it's stropping time. I put some stropping paste on this paper. This stropping paste is actually something I've modified. I had some of these 1 micron or 2 micron size blocks that are usually used on polishing wheels, and I melted it together with some beeswax. It made it into a very nice paste that I like to put on paper. Normally you put this on a leather strop, and it gets absorbed in the leather, and that thing can last you a lifetime technically. But the thing about leather is that it is soft, and when you squeeze the edge against the soft surface, it rounds up the edge, so you have less control over the angle that you're actually stropping. If you put a piece of paper on top of glass, you are pretty certain that it will not flex, it will not bend, and you will have something much closer approximating your targeted angle. So I'm a big fan of putting some stropping paste on a piece of paper and just using that a few times and then throwing it away. You need very little of that paste. And also when you put the paste on paper, you can see the gray leftovers of metal particles that have been scraped off. It reassures that the paste is actually doing its work. You can actually monitor how much metal you are removing, and if you're removing any at all. And as you use this, the paste becomes less and less abrasive because of all of the metal particles. So the longer you strop, the closer to a mirror finish you come. And the 2 microns, 1 micron, half a micron, and that's a extremely fine polish already. It just becomes less and less efficient, you could say, as you keep using it. And at this stage, you will really struggle to feel the microscopic burr on one side of the knife and the other. It takes a lot of effort to actually detect, but it's worth taking your time with this. And if you start with a very rough stone and move directly on stropping, you will spend hours removing that initial burr on one side. Hours. So it's a good idea to have some in-between stages. I go through something in the range of 100, 1000, and then stropping. And it still takes a while. But again, because this attachment is holding on so good, the angle is always constant, so you know that your edge is in contact exactly where it needs to be. And again, you could technically do this while watching TV, because one way or another, the longer you do this, the better the edge becomes. Once you start flipping the knife with each stroke, you just cannot go wrong from that point. And maintenance is mostly just stropping as well for a very long time. So now I spent about 10 minutes shaping the edge and then started stropping it. So in 10 minutes. And the angle is so good that I am even able to do circles with it. The edge does not bite into paper. So I can cheat a little bit, you could say, by going in both directions. It's just because the angle is held so precisely. You could never do this by hand if you were stropping just free-handed. Putting a finger closer to the edge so the forces redistribute. And as I do this, I try to feel the burr scraping on paper, if there's any scraping difference from one side to the other. And there seems to be a little bit on one side more than the other, but still doing both of them. Now removing the attachment and cleaning the edge a little bit, and it cuts better. You can see no back and forwards action, just pushing the knife as much as I can. It's a rounded edge, so it's a little hard to control it, but there's some newspaper. You can see it catches two contact points, so it is shaving into the paper, but there is still some tearing in. And you could say maybe this is because the knife is thick. It's about 2 millimeters thick at the very back of the blade. But I know it can do better, so I will sharpen it more. And it's not too bad, even after 10 minutes of sharpening. But so-so. Back to the attachment of 30 degrees, 15 on each side, and more stropping. And again, there's no time limit on this. The longer you go with it, the better it gets. Trying some cross patterns here. I detected some burr on this side, so trying to cross the path upwards and downwards strokes, just so the microscopic scratches overlap and cancel out each other. And notice the index finger is on the blade, otherwise the thumb is pushing in approximately the middle of the knife, so the rest on the back of the edge and the front of the edge, they make a perfect angle relative to each other. Now here I'm reaching into some fresh paste on the corners. And just a few strokes. I'm going to test the sharpness again. But before that, I'm gonna put the 60-degree angle here. And this is a cheat. So I'm making just one stroke on each side, just to remove the microscopic burr and custom shape the very, very tip of the edge. Too much of that will destroy it, but a little bit makes it much sharper. And you can see I'm just pushing through the paper. Now it's catching it much better. It's hard to control where it's gonna bite because it's just biting everywhere. And here, full pass. And that is satisfying result right there. If I try the same test as we did in the beginning of the video, you see it cuts cleanly through the paper. And if I look at the paper closer, I can see that it actually cut through two pages and into the stropping paper. So sharpness has improved. So I find that sharpening knives is quite a fun and relaxing activity, and it's also makes your knife much more fun to use. For if you are using a knife like this for some heavy duty cutting, you will pretty much improve the control that you have, and with a couple more strokes it would probably reach shaving sharpness. I did not bother in this case because it's just a maintenance run, and at this stage it's not quite yet there for shaving, even though it can cut a hair or two.